Conservative media personality Tucker Carlson railed against the influx of migrants continuing to pour into the country through the southern border, denouncing Republicans and Democrats alike for doing absolutely nothing. Here's a clip from the 30th episode of his show. Let's watch.
The result is a country, our country, that is changing faster than it ever has, but not through democratic means. Instead, by force, through waves of mass immigration that not a single American voted for. What's happening is a crime. It violates both federal law and the core precept of democracy, which is that citizens get to govern their own countries. This is election rigging on a mass scale, and it's fueled by anti-white racial hostility.
Earlier this week, thousands of migrants were released in San Diego, the biggest city near the U.S.-Mexico border and a sanctuary enclave. According to the AP, 500 migrants, many seeking asylum, are being dropped off there by Customs and Border Patrol. And last month, legal crossings surpassed a daily average of more than 8,000. Meanwhile, President Biden, who's being clobbered in the polls, is earning poor marks on the border issue as well. A Fox News poll released this week shows a majority of American, or 71% of registered voters, disapprove of the government's handling of the border, specifically Biden's policies. The poll also finds increased support for the border wall, a reversal from previous surveys. So I don't want to sound too rash on the issue, but I think if Biden was just like, hey, you want a border wall? Let's build a border wall. And now let's also pursue some legislation that will actually address the issue of migration, because we know that the border wall is easily scaled. It's not making a difference as to the number of migrants crossing. We know that a lot of these folks are fleeing violence that risks their life and injury much more than scaling the wall. We've seen videos of folks climbing it. What we really need from the Biden administration is leadership on the issue of sanctions against many of the countries people are leaving and coming to the United States from. We need Biden to discuss repairing U.S. relations with Latin America. We need Biden to discuss what the plan is when the UN sends troops to Haiti. Typically, you have to have Congress approve U.S. troops being on the ground in another country. This is a loophole to get U.S. troops into Haiti. The Biden administration has deported more Haitian migrants than any other administration. We really need a plan. How are we going to process those seeking asylum and those who want to come to the United States to work, to be productive citizens, to join our society? They always complain that the labor market is too hot right now. There are too many jobs and too few workers, but then they also say that we can't possibly process this amount of migrants. We absolutely can. We can use the U.S. military to do it. We can build more processing centers. And instead, they're doing nothing in the short term and apparently nothing really in the long term either.
Yeah, no, I think you're right in terms of one of the first steps being to relieve some of those sanctions on countries such as Venezuela and many others. I mean, we have, for the most part, all but stifled economic growth in those countries. And so you have a crime issue in part because of the drug gangs. And then you also have an economic issue because people just aren't able to find work. And so you put those things together and you're going to have people wanting to go to a better place. I think a part of also reforming the immigration system is we don't have enough immigration judges. I mean, it is not enough to hear hundreds of thousands of people attempting to come into the country. We know that the administration just gave worker visas, I think worker visas to 100,000+ individuals. And part of my question is, when those worker visas expire, do we really expect those people to go back to their home countries? That rarely ever happens. The majority of them will stay in the United States. We have no clue where. We have no clue who many of these people are in terms of their actual background. And I think people should know who's moving into their communities. That's really important. And I want to address something that Tucker said on his show. He mentioned a lot of this is in part because of anti-white racial sentiments. I don't know if I would agree with that. I mean, if you look at the videos, not only of Americans in conservative states, but Americans in liberal cities such as New York, or liberal cities such as Chicago, you will see black, white, all types of people saying this is insane. We need to address this immigration problem. It has become an issue on the local economy. It's taxing on some of the issues that the local government is supposed to address in terms of actual U.S. citizens, let alone the influx of illegal migrants. And so I'm not necessarily sure, Jess, I would take that particular position that it's against white people, as I've seen Americans of every stripe say we just do not like this issue at all.
Yeah, I think it's probably a larger historical picture here, how we had so many migrants come to the United States to work, to start a life from European countries. And then when we have migrants coming in through California, from East Asian countries, when we have migrants coming over the southern border from Latin America, we have a lot of crises. We don't have the capacity to support them. That's a lie. We absolutely have the public resources necessary to process the migrants coming over the southern border. Why is it that we decide to adjust migration policy, adjust our processing centers when we have migrants coming in from Ukraine who are refugees? Why is it that we adjust our policies when it is folks coming over from Europe, folks we consider to be white in the West? I think that's the main criticism here. And I don't know why you and I, Shermichael, can name 10 policies just off the bat here that the Biden administration could try or propose. But now that we have a migrant crisis of Latin American migrants coming over the southern border, they're doing absolutely nothing at all. That is insane when we put it in historical context, to just do absolutely nothing.
I mean, Jess, maybe they should, the White House should call you and myself to sort of give them some advice on how to address this issue. I mean, look, I agree with what you said. 71% of registered voters, you read at the top of this particular segment, of Americans who are saying we just do not approve of the handling. And I think in part because you look, I'll use New York City as an example. New York City Mayor Eric Adams, a Democrat, stated that New York will never be the same again because of the influx of migrants, where they're spending millions and millions of dollars. It's estimated over $1 billion by the end of this year to try to figure out how to house these individuals, provide health care for these individuals. And the mayor has stated we have a homelessness issue in New York City. We have an issue with trying to cater to some of our poorest New Yorkers who need basic necessities, particularly as the winter season is amongst us. We can't do both of these things at the same time. And so from the perspective of many Americans, people are saying, what about us? What about what we're going through? And yet we're somehow able to hand out $5,000 checks a month. In the case of Chicago, many of the black residents were complaining there. How do we have money to just hand out to illegal immigrants? But you have Americans right here in Chicago who are struggling to find decent work. And yet there are no resources for them. We're sent all of the money is tapped out in terms of the social programs, but somehow we have $1 billion+ to give the people who aren't even U.S. citizens. People see this, Jess, and they say, hell no, we need to build a wall in that particular case. Heck no, we need to send those people home. And it's not to say that Americans are against people coming into the country. I think people recognize that immigrants do indeed take jobs that many Americans just don't want to work for a whole host of different reasons. But I'm going to go back to something that Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, who chaired the U.S. Commission on Immigration Reform, stated in the early 90s. And she was a Democrat, by the way. She stated that immigration is a choice, not a right, granted by the United States citizens when it is in our best interest. And so is it in our interest to have some immigrants fill some of those lower wage jobs? Absolutely. But it is also in our interest to have a cap on how many people we allow into the country.
Yeah, I think it's an economic issue at the heart of it, because you have the United States founded on the premise of promoting the general welfare of the people living within the country. It's a constitutional promise to promote the general welfare. And you have this administration, and it's not unique to this administration because the person responsible for this policy is Jerome Powell, who was appointed by Donald Trump. Biden has kept that guy as the head of the Fed. It is our explicit economic policy in the United States right now to keep interest rates high so that it is more difficult to start a business or invest in a new one. They're trying to quell economic activity at a time when inflation is at a high. We cannot afford to have prices continue to go up. So why are you reducing supply by quelling economic productivity? We have the workforce necessary to increase GDP and increase productivity in the United States. We have jobs that need to get done. We have a crisis of people not being able to find childcare for their kids. We have a shortage of healthcare access for people who need it. We have work that needs to be done. We need to transition our energy reliance onto more renewable energy. We have to build that infrastructure. Public transportation is crumbling. We have to rebuild that. There is work to be done. And so the United States is deliberately deciding to restrain capital and quell economic activity. We could put migrants to work. We could put working class people who have remained unemployed for a long period of time to work as well. we could increase supply and reduce prices. And that might cut into some of the corporate profits, but it wouldn't hurt business, especially big business, which is still enjoying record profits. And so at this point, it's an economic decision for them to decide, we're not going to have a policy to integrate migrants into our workforce and make life better for working class people. But what will raising interest rates do? Well, anyone who can afford to loan money right now, wealthy people and big bankers, they're making a killing because they're the ones loaning the money out, getting it back at an 8% interest rate. We're injecting $1.2 trillion into the economy and putting it in the hands of the richest people. That's their deliberate policy. And I think once we finally have a leader who runs for public office, who runs on that, they're going to get support from both sides because it doesn't need to be a racial issue. We don't need to be fighting over scarcity. We need to be promoting the general welfare as the Constitution promises.
More money for those at the top and not enough for those at the bottom. More for the rich, not enough for the poor. I'll just say quickly, people aren't anti-immigrant in this country. This country is mixed with all different types of folks from all over the place. But one thing that I think most people are against, being second in their own country. And in that regard, I think they're absolutely right to feel that way. More Rising after this.